The technology that changed us next on Retro Serial. Hey everyone, welcome to the program. I'm ENC. I'm your host. You're watching Retro Serial. I'm glad you could be joining us today on the podcast. Me and Thrash Pondo Pons talk about technology, the technology we grew up on, the technology and how it's changed, all the way from what we watched on TV or how we watched TV to what we listened to, and going through video games and all kinds of stuff. Anyway, it's going to be a lot of fun to talk about this. It was a lot of fun to talk about this, and I think you're going to enjoy it as well. But before we get to that program, please do me the honor, if you're on YouTube, of liking, subscribing, sharing, all that good stuff that helps us out here on the channel. If you want to go an extra step further, you're always welcome to hit the link below to our Patreon page and help us out there financially. There are two levels of support on the Patreon page. There's the Cornflake Club, which is just a tip jar saying, hey, we like what you're doing, keep it up. And then there's also the Honeycomb Hideout, where you get most all podcasts and most all videos at least one day in advance, or at least advanced enough that you can say you were on the Insiders Club and you knew all about this way before anybody else did. If you're listening to this on podcast only, just go ahead and leave us a review. That would help us out a ton. And what do you? Oh, a review and a rating. That's how you do it on the podcast. Review and a rating. That means a lot to us. And also share it. Also, if you're interested, we do have a YouTube channel where I do have more content. If you like what you're hearing, you're gonna like what you see over on the YouTube page. And join us for our Monday night. So, like, we're going to be talking about technology here in this podcast, but just so you know, on Monday nights we have a live stream, and if you like what you're hearing, you can chime in and tell us your own story about how the technology has changed as you have been growing up, Generation X. So, with all that said, we're going to get straight into our podcast for today. All right, everyone. Hey, welcome to another episode of Retro Serial, the podcast, and we're going to jump right into it. Actually, I've already done an introduction, so you know what the topic's about. And it's a very interesting topic as far as I'm concerned. It's a topic that I've actually wanted to tackle for quite a bit, because I think that if there's one thing that has, that has changed significantly over time, it has been technology. And from when I was a kid in the 70s, just the change, really from the 70s to the 90s, really the big change came, I think, in the 90s. It's kind of like things kind of made a big step forward, but there were still some significant changes. And I want to talk about the technology that we all kind of grew up using. So there are obviously like computer stuff that's kind of like, pared down to ultra bright people in the 80s and 70s, 80s and 90s. But I want to talk about that, but I also want to talk about like stuff we all used. You didn't have to be necessarily ultra bright to use it. I mean, if you met somebody in the 80s who was a computer like programmer, like they were a genius, you know what I mean? They were a genius. Now today, almost anybody can use a computer.
Oh, I know. And people make their own code and whatnot. And that was like science fiction when I was a kid.
Yeah, totally. So let me start out with this. Mm-hmm. Did you have a black and white television?
Yes. Not only do we have a black and white TV in our home, we had color, but they'd break and were expensive to replace. We had a black and white TV in my home. And the first TV I actually owned personally was a gift from my grandparents, and it was one of those little 12-inch black and white portables. Had a great picture. Really? But yeah, I actually had TV in my room for the first time. I was probably 11 or 12, and it was a game changer. It was like such a luxury to have my own television in my room.
Yeah. I did the same thing. I mean, obviously, in when I was born in the 70s, and growing up in the 70s and 80s, we had color TV. I mean, it was a big thing and it was plenty available, but there was a lot of black and white television still around. I mean, and we owned a couple of them myself. And your story parallels mine to a lot of degree. I remember the first television I ever owned, or personally that I had in my room, was a black and white. That was a black and white television. Now you had a portable one.
Mhm.
So what was
Oh,
that like?
well, portable in the sense it wasn't like this. I got to show you this while we're talking about it.
Okay.
It wasn't like this, which I got much later, which is a true portable TV.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Which is also a radio and whatnot. No, it was portable in the sense that it was small and light, and you could pretty much just pick it up and put it wherever you want. I mean, you remember the old style color TVs? I mean, they were in wooden cabinets.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I mean, in fact, what we did was, and apparently a lot of people did this, but it's a little embarrassing. When that TV broke, you put a tablecloth over it,
yep.
used it as an end table, and put the new TV on top of it.
Yeah,
we did that on at least 2 occasions. So
it became your console, basically. It became your
literally
what you put your TV on.
Yeah, because it was such a heavy piece of furniture in addition to actually being a television.
Right.
So you found ways of utilizing stuff even when it broke. But yeah, this one it was portable just in the sense. I mean, I couldn't like take it. I had to attach the cable to it.
Right.
So it wasn't like I could bring it to school and watch TV there, but it was movable, and I took full advantage of that.
Oh, cool. So did you attach cable to it?
Oh, I certainly did. My mother, that was my mother's gift. She actually paid for the cable.
Did you split it? Did you split it yourself? Or did you have a splitter?
We had to have the cable company. What it was is the apartment we lived in had cable access in all the rooms. Just only one was active. So you called the cable company and said, please activate line 2. So they actually, and there was a slide up charge to get that second
with that big kind of metal dowel that hung off the wall that you screwed in, and then you
exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
We split ours ourselves. So the TV that we had in our front room, and I'm talking 80s at this point, had cable on it, and they had to come put it in. But then what we did was I can't remember how it worked, but my stepdad like made wires and ran them over into my room. And then there was these little prongs that were on the back of the television. Do you remember those?
You had to screw them on with a Phillips head screwdriver. In fact, we moved a lot when I was a kid, and invariably, every time you moved, you lost one. So you'd have to go the first couple of days without TV until you could actually go to the cable company and get one. I actually, for years, after TVs became cable ready, and cable ready was a godsend.
I know, yeah, that was.
Back. Yeah. But in the days before cable ready, I used to keep a drawer full of those prongs, so I was never out without one.
So you just in case.
Just in case.
Right. I'm sure it came in handy on many occasions.
I think I still have a couple laying around somewhere.
Did you get a color TV eventually?
We certainly did. It's actually funny. I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but that was actually a surprise. We had actually. Do you remember before the VHS players were in every home, you could rent them?
Yeah.
And I was going to rent one with a friend of mine. And my mother's like, well, all we have is a black and white TV. And I'm like, that's okay. We'll rent black and white movies. We'll get old Universal horror movies and just watch black and white movies. As a surprise, before she got home from work, she went and she got us a VHS player, so we didn't have to rent one. And a color TV. And she's like, you guys give me a hand out in the car? And we're like, yeah, okay, whatever. And we're like, best surprise gift ever.
So it was a gift. She didn't just rent it for you. She bought that.
No, she bought our first VHS player and our first color TV.
That is so cool. I eventually upgraded to a color TV in my room. And unfortunately, I had some water sitting on it, and I spilled some water down the back of it.
Oh no.
And there was a pop, And from that time on, I could only listen to TV. Like I could still hear it, but the picture was out. And I would sit there and listen to TV. I mean, you can kind of get an idea of what's going on, with TV. But I didn't ever have a VHS player in my house. As a matter of fact, we rented VHS players all the way up into, oh man, into the 90s, literally into the 90s. And the first VHS player that we owned was part of that my mom owned it, and then I inherited it when she moved out of Utah. Was one of those things where it was a TV and a VH player in it.
Oh, a combo. I actually have one of those in my garage still.
Oh yeah, I think I've seen it in the background of your of some of those earlier videos.
In the bridge.
Yeah. We had a combo. We had a VHS player in that, and that wasn't like portable, but that was one of those ones that was light enough I could pick it up and take it anywhere with me. So it moved with me on a number of occasions. But then at that point, I mean, we got color TV and cable, and the very first cable thing that we ever got, we moved to the town that I'm currently in, away from the town that I was in. It was a divorce, and we wanted to get out of that town anyway. But what was interesting, and I don't know if this was just regional or not, but the very first, like when we got to this town and we got cable, they did not give us a remote. We had this box that was attached to the TV, and they slid it up to us, and it had this thing that you ran across. It was like click 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 click, like a a horizontal channel changer. Did you ever see any of those? Did you ever see that at all?
I never saw the horizontal ones. Ours, it had like a little dial. It had a dial. We didn't have remotes.
Oh yeah. The TV had a dial, but
the box itself had a dial.
Oh,
and not only did you dial it to get a different channel, you would actually have to fine tune it almost like a radio.
Yeah.
Like every time you change the channel, it'd be a little fuzz or interference, and you'd be like Sparky in those old World War II movies, trying to get the perfect picture. But I don't recall the horizontal ones. No.
Did you have the bunny ears antenna on your TV?
I did. In fact, when I first went to college, I found that copper wire produced the same effect, and we were in an area that was very, very mountainous, so there wasn't a lot of reception. So I blanketed the ceiling of my dorm room with this copper wire I had gotten from an Army Navy store, so that I could actually pull in not just one but two channels. I was the envy of my dorm.
2 channels, really?
2 channels, not just one, 2 channels.
Did you ever do, when you were a kid though? Did you ever do the UHF thing? Try to look for stuff on UHF, or did you have any of that?
One place we lived had UHF. One place when I was very young had UHF, but you'd have to go through the whole dial, and it was always grainy with bad reception and bad sound. So I never got to the UHF too much. I believe my grandparents did where they lived, but I didn't see them a lot. So I usually just stuck with the cable TV.
Yeah. Well, when cable came out, I didn't even do UHF. That was just, I only did UHF when it was, the click 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 channels. And then when we upgraded the cable, I mean, it was nutty. I mean, it was nutty how much television there was. I thought this was insane how much television there was. I got MTV for the first time, and still
TV.
Yeah. And Fox was coming out and all that stuff. I mean, it was just crazy. All right. Well, what about anything else you want to say about televisions themselves, about TV itself? I want to move on to a slightly related topic, and that is the VHS player or whatever.
I was going to say, I don't want to step on your toes. I assume that's where you're going. So let's segue into said.
Okay. All right. So I already said that I had the earliest thing that we rented VHSs, but I do have to ask you this question. Were you a fan of either the Betamax or the disc player, the big huge disc player?
I liked Laserdisc. It was just expensive, and I hated the fact you had to flip it halfway through the movie. I had a friend who had Laserdisc, and I would watch Laserdisc when I went over to his house. As far as Betamax goes, by the time we were actually getting involved in the whole home video game,
Hmm.
Betamax had sort of come and gone. It was always VHS.
Yeah.
So I sort of went straight into the VHS mode. Supposedly, Betamax was a better system. It just, for many reasons, sort of came and went.
They didn't have a good enough advertising or whatever. I think is really what it was. But I did
Well,
hear
I
that they
heard.
had a better picture, but they
Well,
couldn't record as long either, though.
the big problem with Betamax, is my understanding, is they wouldn't share the technology. So other producers had to go with something else, hence VHS.
Oh,
And the problem
really?
with that is now you have all these other brands all using one technology, and you're this little share of the market using yours. And well, it's like, why would I stick with you when I can go this route? It was almost like the Nintendo 64, which still used cartridges. Every other system on the planet had switched to discs, and
Uh-huh.
Nintendo's still producing cartridges. Well, why would I go with you guys when if I go with a disc system, I can use everyone else's games on my system?
Right,
And
right.
they basically, it's sort of planned obsolescence almost. But
Yeah.
the VHS player was just such a game changer. Now the funny thing about it though is that actually originated earlier. I actually knew a couple kids. They were the rich kids in my school. They actually had VHS systems prior to the 80s. The problem was there really wasn't any way to get movies for them. The reason they used them mostly was to record TV shows and watch them later, which don't get me wrong, that's a huge deal. That's a huge boon.
Well, you could
But
fast forward to the commercials
exactly. But
on
just
those.
if you're busy doing homework or have to do something like go to your aunt's for dinner, you can record what you want to watch so you don't miss your favorite shows. I mean, if I missed Tuesday night when I was a kid, Happy Days, Laverne and Shirley, all that, I mean, it broke my heart. And Friday nights, forget about it. If I missed Donnie and Marie, I had a bad weekend.
Yeah, it
So
was just ruined for you after
ruined,
that. I mean,
ruined.
it's like life's not worth living. You might as well hurl
Seriously.
yourself off a bridge.
Well, that's another story. But
But
but but
yeah.
they in the 80s you finally got the video stores,
Oh
and they
yeah.
actually produced professional grade movies you could take home and watch. And I was a movie fanatic, always had been. One of my earliest memories with my father is on a rainy Saturday we'd watch old horror movies on Creature Feature.
Uh-huh.
And so I've been a movie fanatic my whole life. So the idea that you could just go out, rent a movie, bring it back to your house and watch it, I mean, that was
No, it was awesome. And we had the rich people in our neighborhoods and stuff like that, where they would have like all the movies. You'd go over to their house and they'd have like all this huge selection of movies. And if ever there was somebody who had Star Wars, anything Star Wars, and New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi. When I that was it. Of course, there was those two crappy Ewok movies, but didn't want to watch those.
won't count those.
Um, but um, but man, I mean, it was just I was your best friend. I was like, oh, you got Star Wars? Well, what are you doing today?
Watching
I
Star
wanted
Wars with you,
I wanted
apparently.
to watch that. Yeah. And we had a friend now, pretty early on, we had some friends that had the two VHS players, and they would record VHS to VHS. And so he had a lot of movies. And then plus he would record off of Showtime and HBO. And so then I mean, he just had a ton of movies. He was really one of my earlier best friends.
I can see.
And no, well, we were friends. Other than that, I just But if you were somebody else and you had Star Wars, well, you were my best friend for that day because I wanted to go to your house and watch Star Wars.
Star Wars.
But that was a game changer there. The two VHS players. But to go back to the other thing though, the disc player, I had only seen a handful of discs. I think we saw Superman one time on disc, and it was at another friend of mine, well, at a family friend of mine that we rented. This is an interesting story. So my mom, single mom, and this was back before my stepdad, so I'm kind of jumping back and forth in my mind here, and I'm not indicating when, but before my stepdad, that kind of from 10 to 15, that was when they were married. My mom, single mom, was a nurse, and a lot of times she had to work odd hours. So I had these babysitting families that became like second families to me, quite honestly.
Mhm.
And where I am from, we didn't know this because we moved here from California. But where I am from, there is a huge polygamous community. And
Really?
yeah, yeah,
No kidding. I did not know
yeah,
that.
tons. There's the whole city out here that's
Mhm.
dedicated to that. Three cities out here that's dedicated to the polygamous lifestyle.
That
But
shouldn't have surprised me now that I think about it. But
right,
continue.
but there's all these other places, and then plus when you go up north, there's all these other smaller places that you don't really know that they're polygamist. Like you can't tell. And I lived basically with a polygamist family, like half time at least. They were like really good friends of ours. Now the guy had not had a plural wife. He had not yet married, so he was still only had one wife at the time, but he was open to polygamy. But we didn't know. Now, why I say we didn't know is because if you live where I live and there's a polygamous town next to us, um, you can tell they're polygamous. They dress they dress different, their hair's different, but there are places where you can't tell. So you can spot those people right away. But that family would rent VHSs and stuff like that. And we did rent a disc player at that there, and that's where I saw Superman was there. It was a big deal for them to bring home a disc player on the weekend. And but I mean, I was real little at that time. We're talking before 10, basically. So like 8, 7, 8, 9, you know, and I do remember having to turn those things over, you know.
Halfway through. Yeah.
Yeah. Now I have a question. Did you ever get your disc? Did you ever get your VHS to stop blinking 12?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I would. Yeah.
I never did.
Yeah.
I,
Yes, I did learn how to set the clock. The first one I had was pretty simple. It had a sort of the hours column, the 10 minutes column, and the 1 minutes column. So just a case of going. Some of them were more complicated, but that was always a pet peeve of mine. So yes, I always set the time, and invariably there'd be a blackout the next day, and you'd
yeah.
have to start from ground zero.
Yeah. I heard it's pretty easy. I just never really got into it. I just never, really looked into it. Now, did you do the whole VHS to VHS thing? Bring home movies and copy them and record them?
Constantly. In fact, one of the things we used to do with quasi parental permission is if we were having like a sleepover, because by this point, my two best friends and I all had VHS. If you were staying over to the friend's house, you would discreetly take the VCR with you and you'd set it up and you'd rent a bunch of movies and you would tape them all. Some of them by this point were getting copy guarded. My friend had a way around that. Never quite explained it to me, didn't particularly care, but he knew how to get behind the copy guarding.
Oh
And
yeah, yeah.
yeah, and yes, we I hate to use the word pirated, but we pirated many movies over the
Yeah,
years.
you did. I mean, I
Yeah.
did. We did. I mean, it's not necessarily ethical, and it
No,
shouldn't
it's
have
downright
done it.
illegal, actually.
Yeah, it's downright illegal, but I don't know a single person. They'd have to arrest everybody in the known world, I think.
But we thought we were so hardcore we did it. And just that insult to injury, that little warning in the beginning saying, warning, 10 years in prison, yada, yada, blah. We would record that on our pirated videos just to go, ha, like in the movie, what was it? Amazon Woman on the Moon, where
Uh-huh.
the actual video pirate character played by William Herschel, I want to say, but he's actually recording a pirated movie. And when that warning comes up, he goes, "Oh, I'm so scared." And we wouldn't actually, we thought we were so hardcore stealing movies. Naughty.
After the advent of like kind of the chain video stores that like got huge, And then a lot of it, I found myself not doing that as much. I found myself just going to the video store and renting a video. And because a lot of times, and I don't know if you had this situation, I still do this, and that is I'm overwhelmed by choice.
Yeah.
I don't know what to
Mhm.
watch. Like I can watch a million things, and I did that with VHSs too. I'd go over to my friend's house who I was talking about, and I mean he just had tons of videos, and I would not know what to watch. Literally, I'd be like, I could watch this, I could watch this, and I just would be stuck trying to think of what to watch. I don't know
The
if you had
agony of
that problem.
choice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. The agony of choice almost made me frozen to some degree. Where if I would go to a video store, there's the agony of choice, but I'm buying it. It's just like, okay, I want to go there. It's normally a new release or something like that. Or I already have my mind made up before I go there. I want to see this show. So I go to buy that show and look at other things. But where you just go over and there's just the onslaught of tons and tons of videos, it's just like, wow. So DVDs, when did DVDs kind of come out and become popular? Before 2000s, right? I'm
Yeah,
sure
it was in the 90s. It was
in
in
the
the
90s,
90s.
right?
I would say it was around 2000 plus a little where it took over the market because initially they were both. In fact, I've had my fair share of combos. In fact, I still have two functioning combos in my house,
I have a
which has
combo.
DVD and VHS
Yeah.
capability. But that you could tell I was working actually in a video store at that time, and you could tell VHS's days were numbered, which is very strange. It's almost like VHS went from being the game changer to an obsolete technology in the span of less than 20 years.
Yeah.
It
It's
was
a
really
dinosaur, is it? I remember going
like a
to
footnote,
yeah, I remember going to a Hollywood video here, and I should have caught on because we had a combo, and even into my adult years, I still would watch VHSs. I mean, because a lot of times they'd be cheaper, and it was just one of those things. But I should have known because this video store started selling all their VHSs. It was like, oh,
uh-huh,
we're selling them. It's like
uh-huh.
five of them for $10, and come get them or whatever. And I mean, and I bought a ton of them. I'm like, oh yeah, this is the best. And the next thing you know, they're gone. I mean, it's just you just don't watch them. You watch a DVD, and they're just as cheap, and they're better, and they have options on there like behind the scenes and all, you know what I mean, all those little options they have.
And the really funny thing about the VHS were the actual units themselves. I was watching Dave's archives and he was showing old commercials from like 84. And it's like, come down to Crazy Slim's furniture store. We have VHS players for only $598.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
And they were that expensive for a
Yep.
while. And in 2003, the last year you could actually find a just VHS player, I was working in that video store, and with the purchase of, I don't know, say $100 and more, you could buy a VCR for $50.
Yeah,
They were practically giving them away at the end. So
yeah.
it's really funny how they the market literally dried up almost
It
overnight.
was huge. This is why rich people had them almost. I mean, because I mean, people were more well off because you can just drop, $300 to $500 on a VHS player. You know.
Mm. But then it went down to less and less and less and less. I think the first VHS player I bought, I think was $175, and that was like a steal. It was like, oh my, it's under $200. They're
Right.
practically giving it away. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's shift into a little bit here
Sure.
of music.
Ah,
What do you
yes.
listen to music on? Um, let's start with I just have this question. Did you ever have an 8-track player?
I did actually. I did. It was actually in our car though.
Uh-huh.
It was in a car, and then the first stereo I was given as a gift. Instead of what would now be a CD option, it was vinyl, but it also had a slot for 8-track. And I actually had a few 8-track albums.
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah. I missed something there. That you had a vinyl that had an 8-track in it as well.
Oh, the
Not
stereo.
not in your car.
Not my car. No, no. The first stereo I got as a gift for my room.
Oh, okay. All right.
The
All
first
right.
stereo, of course, it had the record player option, but it also had a slot to play 8-track cassette. So
Gotcha.
yes, I eventually did have it both in my
I was
home
like,
as
how
well
do
as our
you get
car.
a that's good. How do you get a record player in your car?
That's the
Playing
easy part. Just keeping it from scratching the record. That's the
right.
toughie.
That's the
You
tough
know,
one. So, what did you start out on?
a record player. But
Record player.
when I was very little, I got one of those like record players that look like a suitcase,
Yeah.
and you take the top off and play the record. But by the time I got into my teens and I was buying my own music, those old style cassettes, those are the ones I really loved
Yeah.
for two major reasons. One, I could record them myself, so I would buy the blank cassettes
Yeah.
and record them on that stereo I told you
Uh-huh.
about. And two, because you could listen to them anywhere. I had a boom box. I had
Hmm.
a Walkman with a cassette player in it, so I could actually, even when I was riding on my bike, I could listen to my cassette tapes. So the those cassette tapes were possibly my favorite during the '80s period for
Yeah.
music.
Yeah. I started out with the record players myself. I don't think I ever owned an 8-track to my knowledge. There might have been an 8-track in a car at one time in the 70s that my mom owned, but I don't really remember that. I remember seeing them, and I remember friends' parents having them. But I never had that. I don't think and to my knowledge, I don't think I've ever owned an 8-track personally. But I did start out with records, and the first kind of collection of records that I got, but I got a stereo, like you're saying, like a stereo for my room. And I remember I was 10 or 11 years old when I got that stereo, and it had a record player, and it had a tape player, the old style tape player in it. And the first few things that I got was the records. And the records that I got, I remember very distinctly the first few records that I got Paul McCartney, Pipes of Peace. I got Annie, the album from the movie Annie. I got the Jacksons. I don't know if you remember, it wasn't the Jackson 5. It was a later emanation of them in the 80s. It was called the Jacksons because there were 6 of them because their youngest brother joined the crowd.
Michael
Uh,
had gone solo by that stage.
no, Michael went back and did it. There was actually
Oh,
a
he did.
video. Yes, there
Oh,
was actually a video of him, and it was a popular song of him and Tito were kind of the two in the video. I don't remember the song, but it was called, instead of calling it Jackson 5, it was called the Jacksons because it had 6 Jacksons in it. And Kenny Rogers, the gambler.
gambler.
And I think that was the first set of no, oh yes. And I did win for myself off the radio, Jefferson Starship. Um, we built this city on rock and roll, or whatever album that was on. We built this city on rock and roll.
I believe it
Um,
was Starship, and it was their self-titled album,
was
like
it? It was just,
'84-ish.
yeah, it was just Starship. So that's the timeline that we're looking at.
Hmm.
But I quickly abandoned records altogether because the tapes were so much easier to get around. Oh, the other thing that I had was I can't believe I forgot to say this. I had a long play record of Indiana Jones, the
Oh.
Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Mhm.
It was kind of an abridged version of the movie. There's a lot cut out, but you could listen to the movie almost like a radio drama, but on
Yeah,
record.
yeah. I'm with you.
Yeah, I had that, and you can actually listen to that on YouTube, by the way.
No kidding. A friend of mine had something like that with Star Wars.
Yes, there were Star Wars ones too. I never got. I quickly abandoned after that few. I never bought them. I only bought tapes. Loved tapes. That I was a tape person even well into the disc player era. Just because I had so many of them, and there was no reason not to. I mean, the discs were better. But they weren't so much better. Gosh, do you remember how much discs were when they originally came out?
They were like $30 a disc.
I know.
And the cassette tapes were like $5.99 at Strawberry Records.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know?
they were and they were also starting to come out with at the time. So for us, it was $10 was about the price of a new tape that came out. So if you got like the new Motley Crue tape or the new In Excess tape or something like that, it was $10. But they were starting to come out with like all these old, like I remember the older Ozzy Osbourne tapes coming out, and you could buy those for, like you're saying, $5.99. The other thing is we had a five and dime store where I was, or not a thrift store, but a pawn shop. And they had tapes in there all the time. You could go and buy for like $1.99, $2.99. I mean, it was just insane. I got Ozzy Osbourne's Randy Rhoads tribute album there, or tape there. Yeah. And I mean, it was just insane how much. And I bought tapes all the way up until, I don't even know. It was crazy. Like I almost missed the CD era. I didn't quite, and went straight to digital downloads from tapes. There was a small overlap when they started to become cheaper.
Much cheaper.
But it was late 90s. I think I had all Nirvana on tape, all the Nirvanas on tape. I had even the Unplugged I had on tape, which was what, 94. And I think maybe one of the very first CDs I ever bought that was actually CDs was like Natalie Merchant when she went solo on her first solo album. And then after that I started, because we actually got a used CD store and I started buying some CDs. But I'll tell you what, I mean, I just had tapes galore until it was taken over. The industry was taken over by the thing. One of the things that really switched me over was I did have a tape player in my car. And then when that broke, I wasn't going to get a new tape player. We just upgraded the car to a CD player. Anyway, that's my issue on tape. Got anything else to say about that? I took a long time there.
Oh no. I still have, I believe I have a shoebox full of the old cassette tapes laying around somewhere.
Yeah.
In my garage, or in my, what I call it, the Harry Potter room. It's the big closet I have under my stairs. But I still have some somewhere. And that portable TV I showed you actually has a cassette player on it. So if I ever got nostalgic and wanted to play music, I could play it on that. Only thing of it is I don't need to. I can't remember the last time I looked up a song on YouTube and it wasn't there.
Yeah.
You know,
right. Yeah, that's true. I do this boom box in the back as part of the retro series, because it does have a tape player. It does have a tape player in it. And I actually had a tape here at one time, and I was going to look for the year on it. But you can see here I have VHS players. I mean, look, even Star Wars Episode 1. I have as late as that I had bought on VHS. You know, so whenever that came out what, in 99?
Yeah.
And it was at least 6 months after that so I had VHSs up until extremely late, as you can see.
2004 is the one I think they stopped making them all together.
Yeah. Are they making them again in retro or no?
No, they'll probably do DVD again, or Laserdisc even. Although no, Laserdisc they have officially gotten rid of that technology. But you might see them on CDs again, or shall I say DVDs again.
Well, my only problem is I do have my wedding still on a VHS player, and on a VHS, and I'd like to get it on disc at some point. I mean, I haven't watched it in forever, but it would be nice to have. And we did have it at one time on disc, but I left the curtain open and it on, and the sun came and ruined it. So, but I still have the VHS. So I know that there are places that do that for you though.
Yes, there are. Yeah, there's one here somewhere. I want to say in Hyannis, but yeah, there are. I'm sure you can find somebody who can do that for you.
Well, let's move on. Let's move on to another type of technology that we grew up with. Let's talk about gaming technology. Did you have an Atari?
I never had one of my own. My friends all did. One of my earlier memories though is I remember going to my grandparents' house and they had Pong, and this would have had to have been in the mid 70s. I would have been like 7 or 8.
Yeah.
I never actually had one of those game systems myself. My friends did, so when I went to sleepovers and stuff, I'd play there, but I never actually had my own, and probably because I was obsessed with arcades when I was a kid. I loved going to the arcade. To
That
me, it was
makes
actually part of the
sense.
experience. So, and I was also an only child, so when playing the game systems on your own is fun, but it's only really, really, really fun if you have a competitor. So it's like I seem to always have more fun with it when I was actually playing at my friend's house with them, and we can go
Okay.
head to head.
Right.
So but yeah, no, I later on I did. I
Hmm.
remember as I grew up, we had the Nintendo. We had a couple of different Nintendo systems later on, but that
Hmm.
was well into adulthood, and now we're talking late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah.
But I sort of missed the boat for that during the 80s.
I we had an Atari player. Uh, I got it for Christmas one year. I think I was again. I think I was 9, and because I just kind of remember things before my mom got married and after my mom got married and then after she got divorced is kind of how I divide my life up in those early years. Um, and it was before that, but it was my uncle's, and he sold it to my mom, bought it from him to give to me for Christmas. So I got all of his games, and he probably thought it was cool because he was 5 years older than I am, and so he was probably kind of moving out of that and moving into getting his license and things like that, or preparing to get his license. Um, and more hanging out with other, not just staying home playing video games or whatever, but whatever disc, whatever, not discs, whatever cartridges he had, that's all I ever had. So we didn't have it for very long. And like it was like Pac-Man and Asteroids and Space Invaders and Defender. That was my favorite one.
I love
Did you?
Defender.
Yeah,
Yeah, I love Defender.
Defender was awesome, but it still was nothing like going to the arcade.
Loved the
I love
arcades.
the
Loved
arcade
the
too.
arcades.
That was the best. That was the best, is to go to the arcades. But the thing was, is I had a friend of, it was a friend of mine, it was a neighbor, and he lived kind of like around the corner, but our backyards were connected. So I just go to his through the backyard, to his house, and he had a an Atari game. But what sucked about it was that every time, like, we said, "Hey, let's play Atari," his older brothers and dad would take over, and basically, like, we had to play like when they weren't there. Because if we said, "Hey, let's play Atari," and we'd get it out and set it up, they would literally just come over and take the stuff, and then we'd have to wait for like an hour before they were done, like playing, and then go, "Oh yeah, okay, here you go, there you
Like
go."
the lion taking the kill away from the cheetah. They're just like bam,
Yes,
and then you have to
yeah,
wait your turn, even though
yeah,
it was your idea in the first place. Yep,
it
I
was
was there
awful.
on a number of occasions. I've had.
And they never did, I never went over there and saw them. It was almost like they didn't even have the idea to play until we wanted to play. Like, "Oh yeah, that's a great idea, good idea, I'll just hog the game."
Oh
It
yeah,
was awful.
I can see that. I can see that.
It was. Did you get one of the Game Boys or anything like that?
It wasn't called a Game Boy. I did have a couple of handheld game systems. I had one for, I want to say, was it Galexia, where
Oh yeah.
it's all the spaceships that kind of come at you at once, and you have to go. And then I had one, I want to say, for Space Invaders. I had two over the years because they only played the one game. And so, but I did have those, and those were fun, particularly if you were on like long car rides.
Hmm.
And do you remember Mr. Merlin?
No.
It was like a handheld game system, and it had different games in it that you could program,
Oh,
and that was kind of fun.
was that like those? It was almost like black and white little games.
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
And it
I
was
do
tic
remember
tac
that.
toe or hide and seek or whatever, but it was good for long car
We
rides.
had all those things like the speak and spell, or the. Did you ever have one of those? The say and spell. They're for kids. They're
No,
like
no.
early computers. It was in ET. Remember E.T. when
Oh
he
yeah, yeah, yeah,
when he
yeah, yeah.
hooked
But
up the say and spell or speak and spell to
yeah,
the
I was they didn't have that when I was a kid. That actually came out a little bit later. I think
oh
I was
yeah
like 12 or 13, so I would have again missed the boat on that too.
yeah. Well, I remember the little digital football player thing. Remember
I do
that?
remember those. I remember those,
There
and
was
we
this
used to
little
eat those up.
red lights or
Yeah,
whatever.
deet, 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 deet,
Yeah,
deet. Yeah, I remember those, and
those were yeah, they were tough. They were
yeah,
tough
they were they
to
were tough.
use.
And after a while, I mean, it was really cool the first few times you did it, but when the novelty wore off, it was just like, you know,
It wasn't fun at all. It
yeah,
wasn't
no,
fun at all.
yeah.
All
But
right, let's. And there's something else about games you wanted to bring up or no?
just that to this day, I still miss the arcades. I really do, and it's sad too because uh, they don't. The games they have now aren't like those old style 80s video. There was something about the 80s video games with the archaic technology and the funny bells and noises they made. There was something about them. There was something very when I watch old movies and it shows them taking place in an 80s arcade, I'm like,
Yeah, like just nostalgia. Yeah.
yeah,
I think
because
I've mentioned before on this program that we had a place called Chuck's Arcade and it was just, I mean, it was the best. I loved going there. I spent all my money there. They even gave me um, free games because I would go there all the time and I would just hang out because it was like a place to hang out too. You know what I mean?
oh yeah,
And I got to
yeah.
know the owners and they would give me free tokens. They would just say, "Here you go. Here's some free tokens." And they were nice people. But I mean, it was a good thing because I would literally spend all my money there. If I ever got
Well,
any money, I'd go down there and play video games.
the one in my area was called Schools Out. It's been gone for years now, but it was in that Kmart Plaza. Remember the Kmart we were talking about just the other day,
Uh-huh.
where the Kmart still had the food court in it,
Right, right.
and in between was a bookstore which actually sold comics. And this is right around the time I was getting into comics as well. So I could read a bunch of comics, drop a bunch of quarters in the arcade, and get a couple of really awesome hot dogs, all in the same strip mall. And there was a movie theater at the far end. So if we were going to see a movie, I'd have my mom drop us off early. We'd spend a couple hours there and then go see a movie, and she'd pick us up after the movie. So we could actually spend an entire day in this one plaza.
That's awesome. That's
Yeah.
awesome. Yeah, I mean, you got a bookstore, yeah, you got all that stuff there. I mean, who needs to go home? You go home to sleep,
Exactly.
right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's all. You go home to sleep and then you get up and you do it again. Just live your life, man. Yes. So let's talk about the big one. Let's talk about computers.
Yeah.
And then maybe some more different, I don't know, here and there technology, phones and stuff like that a little bit later. But let's talk about the big one because that's the big one right there is computers. I mean, when I did have somebody gave me a computer when I was a kid and I
Really.
had no idea how to set it up. I set it up one time and I don't even know what kind it was. It was the weirdest thing. And I really thought you could do anything on computers. I mean, I believe this. I did not know. I just didn't know the line between, what was on TV and what they were doing with computers and what you could do with computers at home. So I had no idea. Did you have a computer? Did you have a computer in the 80s?
Well, yes and no. My parents split up when I was a kid, as you know, and
Yeah.
my father worked for IBM
Hmm.
for his whole life. He retired years ago, but he spent his career with IBM, and he actually had one of the first generation home computers. And when I would go to visit him, my kid brother, half brother, shall we say, but the brother is made, and we would go over, and he would show me all the things he could do with this. It wasn't the Tandy. My father said what it was, but it was an actual IBM home computer, and it was amazing. It was actually better than like the home computers. Like I did have a few friends in high school who had home computers, but they were very low end technology. But the one my father had was awesome. We did have something, it was like a computer lab. This is before computers became something in every household. Schools would actually have computer labs. It'd be an offshoot
Yep.
of the library, and they would have rows and rows of Apple II computers. I basically broke my teeth on the old style Apple II, and there was this one game on it because, of course, I used to play games. I used it to write papers and whatnot as well. But they had a game that was called Sun Tzu's The Ancient Art of War.
Wow.
And it was the coolest game in the world. Basically, there were two sides. They look like stick figures, but some would have swords and some would have bows and arrows. And it was like an old style, something you'd see on TomTom grid map. And you'd have the different armies on both sides, and you'd take villages and fortresses. And I would play that game for hours. There's actually demos of it still on YouTube. And I heard you can actually, there are downloads on some sites where you can actually set it up in your computer and play versions of it. But I played that game like I probably could have gotten a 4.0 in college if I hadn't found that game.
We just played Oregon Trail. That was, did you ever play Oregon Trail?
No, I'm not familiar with Oregon Trail.
Oh, it was just it was kind of a learning game kind of a thing. And we played it on like an Apple II at school. And it was, as a matter of fact, what's interesting is, what's called, Zennials, people born between like I think it's 79 to 84, like that little, they can identify as Gen X or millennials, just depending on how they were raised. They're called
Zennials.
Zennials.
Zennials. I like it, but I hadn't heard the term before.
They're sometimes called the Oregon Trail generation. Because they, I don't know, it was just because I don't know, because that's what we were playing in school. And I'm not a Zennial. I'm a Gen Xer, early 70s. Second wave Gen Xer. But we played Oregon Trail, which was basically, it was like a story where you're going to Oregon from the East Coast. You're going to Oregon. And then you like, it'll say things like, so many people died of dysentery, or in your camp, or now Indians are going to raid, or you're low on food, so you have to shoot your food. And it would have a little gun, and then a little, bleep, 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 deer going across, and you'd have to shoot the deer in order to get food. And basically you either lived and made it to Oregon, or you died.
Sounds fun.
Yeah. I mean, like a lot of video games, you either live or died. But that's the only game I really ever remember playing. I was just more into arcades and then plus the Atari. But I knew that the people were playing games on computers, but it didn't seem like they were any of the games that I wanted to play, basically. That wasn't like they were playing Pac-Man or something. They were playing all these games for computers. And I remember even when a friend of mine, I was living with them when I was 18, and my mom had just moved out of this town, and I was renting a room from them. And they had like this really nice, I don't know, what is it, like a Commodore 64 or something like that?
Oh, yes. And, my cousins had one of those.
And he had games on there, but they were not, I mean, to me, they just weren't as cool as going to the arcade. And they just weren't arcade games either. Like when you have an Atari, they're basically arcade games at home, less quality, but arcade games at home.
Yes, like Space Invaders and
that type of thing. Right. But all these games were all just kind of like, I don't know, just kind of weird games. I was just like, I'm not that interested in it. But computers were crazy. I didn't get a computer. That one computer I talked about, but that was really a blip on the screen. Couldn't use it. Didn't know how it worked. Didn't know what the heck it was. I couldn't even name it for you. Couldn't even pick it out in a lineup of computers. But I didn't get a computer until like the late 90s, like the personal computer. And then by then it was more than games. I mean, I was doing, schoolwork and things like that on it. But originally, I think pretty much everybody was just using it for games, weren't they?
Games, yeah, pretty much. They would say, "Oh, I'll use it to write papers on and use it for research and this and that," but they never did. That was just a selling point so that their parents would buy it for them. Right. But in reality, they used it to play games. And a lot of them were specifically for the computer. Some of them were cool, but I remember there was that whole phase of text screen games where there's no real action, just the computer gives you an entire story sentence by sentence,
Yeah.
and you have to pick which direction to go in. And if you make the wrong choice, you die. And my friends love those, and I'm like, it's basically like one of those choose your own adventure books.
Yeah.
Only, more dull. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
More hardcore. And but hey, to each their own. A lot of people love them. So
Yeah. Well, what about let's talk about phones and stuff like that. Let's talk about some of these other things like video play, not players, but recorders and phones and I don't know, mismatches or any stuff like that. Did you have so I remember, let me just start off this. I remember the very first time we had my uncle got, it was in my grandma, because it's my uncle, but he was living with my grandmother, that they got a cordless phone, and I thought that was the coolest thing in the world. But it wasn't a cordless phone. Like I really thought that it was like a phone you could drive with, and I was like, no, you can't. You can just walk around the house with this phone. You can't. It's just cordless. Did you guys ever get a cordless phone?
Not until I was out of school. During the 80s, I had friends who had them. In fact, I remember I had called up a girl who, a friend of mine, I needed a homework or something. And she's like, I'm in the living room. I'll have to go to my room and get it. And she's still talking to me. And I'm finally like, are you going to go and get the papers for me or what? And she's like, oh, I'm on my way. And I'm like, really? Because we're still talking. She's like, I'm on a cordless phone. And I'm like, cordless phone? What is this cordless phone you speak of? It's like, oh no, it's a phone where you can walk around with it like a walkie-talkie. And I'm like, that is cool squared. But no, we didn't get one until much later. The funny thing, you mentioned driving with a phone, because I remember when I saw my first car phone, and this was like science fiction. This was like Star Trek to me. I had got out of school and I was in a hurry, and a buddy of mine was giving me a lift somewhere. And it wasn't his car. His boss, he worked at some restaurant. His boss it was a candy apple red Trans Am with leather interior. It was gorgeous, T-tops, the works, loved it. But it had a car phone. And I think just to impress me, this kid, Pete, great guy, he just said, oh, hang on, I have to make a call. And I got, huh? And he picked up the phone and dialed it in the car. And I'm like, mind blown.
So it was one of those cars that, so the portable phone was like this big suitcase, and then you had a phone on top, but his car actually had the suitcase somewhere hidden in it.
Oh, they actually, at the time, they called them car phones. Yeah. And the car was it was actually installed into the console.
But that technology that you would normally carry around
in a purse. Yeah, my mom had one that it was like in a purse. But yeah, that was actually built in somewhere in the console of the car. I think it was in the trunk, actually. I think the actual equipment was in the trunk, and they ran a cord so that you could pick it up on the it wasn't in the dashboard. It was in that column in the middle. Yeah.
Never had a car, never even seen a car phone my whole life. Never even seen one of those, except for in movies, of course. But never got to see one really. I just saw I knew they existed. And then the very first mobile phone that we got, that I had remember seeing, was the big brick. Remember those?
The big brick, yeah.
Yeah, the big
brick. I didn't have one, but yeah.
With the wire antenna on it. And it was huge. It was literally a brick. I never got one of those either, but I had seen those. And I had a friend who got into the cell phone business really early. Actually, it was interesting. It was a place that was called Excel. And I was a rep for a little while. It was one of those down marketing things, but it was long distance services. But then he also opened a store. It was one of the very first stores where you could buy mobile phones in this town, because he had made a ton of money on Excel, like ton of money. He was 2 up from me. And the guy up, did you ever get involved with any downlines, or were you smart enough to stay out of all that?
No, I stayed out of it.
You're lucky. I made some money. I got a couple $100 a month, doing it. It wasn't anything you could live off of, but I didn't go broke. But the I mean, I made my money back on that one, but it was basically, back when it was, when you had to dial, hey, save your friends a buck or two, dial 10 10 3 2 1, and it will save you on, on this much, or, all these codes that came out where you could, where in, and people were competing. This is 10 cents a minute. This is 9 cents. This is 12 cents a minute. And instead of a flat rate, we don't even think about that anymore. It's crazy. We don't even think about when to call or whatever. We just call whoever we want to call.
Call after 8 or
Yeah. Well, this was I was in a company that sold long distance, and it was like 10 cents a minute, and that was unheard of. That was unheard of at the time. It was like 10 cents a minute was like about as cheap as you could get, especially during the day. Mm-hmm. But he was too ahead of me, and he had just made a killing off of this. I mean, just a killing. He showed me checks. I mean, he was getting $25,000 checks and stuff. And he wasn't a friend, I mean, he was a business guy that I knew. I was acquaintance with him. And he opened up the first mobile store, but he liked me, and he actually offered me a job there one time, which I turned down. Unfortunately, I shouldn't have turned it down, because they were selling mobile phones, were like selling cars. It was almost like a car lot. You'd go in and you'd choose, and you'd have somebody, hey, can I help you find something? And it was kind of a big deal. It was very luxurious. But my first mobile phone was one of those where you saw the numbers on the front, you know what I mean? And no, actually my first mobile phone was a flip phone. It was a flip phone.
Love the flip phones. I miss my flip phone.
Yeah.
Again, because like somebody on a Star Trek, beam me up, Scotty.
Well, look at what I got here.
Oh yeah, there you go.
A Verizon flip phone. Look at that. That was the bomb right there. I think this was not my first phone, but this was exactly what my first phone was like. Actually, my first phone had a screen on it, so you could tell who called you.
Oh, I think I had a phone like that over the years. Yeah.
Yeah. Before you flipped it open.
So,
right.
Because you would not.
It's crazy that this was such the envy. That flip phone was such the envy of everybody. And now it's nothing compared to this. I mean, nothing at all compared to that.
Likewise.
Yeah. Right. So what was the first cell phone you got?
Ooh. It probably wasn't as good as that one there. It was just some cheapo phone. But I would have been.
But you never got the brick, right?
No, I never got the brick. Oh, no. My mother had one for work, and it was in like a purse. Uh-huh. And the phone was like on it actually was on a cord, one of those old style cords that you would take out of the purse. And she used to carry it on her shoulder like a purse. And she did it for work, but she used it for a private life as well. I didn't get my first cell phone until I started commuting. And my greatest fear in life is that I'd be somewhere between Cape Cod and Boston, broken down, and not have any way to get help. So it was more out of a necessity than an actual luxury. Fortunately, I never needed it, but something tells me if I hadn't gotten an emergency phone, I would have. That's just the way my life works. Yeah. So, and I'll never forget the first time it rang. I wasn't used to the sound. Yes. And I'm driving and I'm doing about 50 miles an hour and I'm going over the Sagamore Bridge. Uh-huh. I don't know if you know anything about the Cape Cod Canal, but it's 2 lanes traffic, but it's very, very, very tight. You can actually feel the person driving next to you with your elbow. And I'm going over the bridge. And I've always hated going over that bridge, even when I wasn't driving it. It just something intimidating. It's a huge old style suspension bridge type situation. And as I'm going over the bridge, all of a sudden, and I'm like, where? What? It was my phone ringing.
Yeah.
My wife called to ask me if I remember my phone or something silly like that. And I almost went into the oncoming traffic because it startled me so bad.
Wondering what the heck that was.
What the heck is that? Yes.
I remember going to the store and looking at phones, and this one guy was complaining about about the fact that the phones were chimey, that they didn't ring like regular phones, and he was really upset about that.
That tinny sound, yes,
And
yeah.
I was just like, what are you kidding? I'm like, there's no, like, if you look at an old phone, that it's either an electronic bell in there or it was a bell in there. I mean, that's what it was. It
Yes,
was
an
a
actual
bell
bell.
that rang. I'm like, you can't. There's no bell in this thing. That's why. As are you going to complain about the sound of this thing? I mean, you got especially when it started to have, like, this one's got a little thing that's got where you can get on the web. It even has a side where you can get on the web and look at your email.
Oh.
So that's a much later model. But I mean, I was just like, you're complaining about the sound of the that it doesn't sound like your phone at home. I
It
mean,
was a little tinny.
yeah. Or you could do that was a big thing too when you started being able to download your own personalized
Your
ringtones
ringtones, yeah, ring to that. That was cool. That was cool. Yes, but
and texting for the first time.
I actually didn't learn to text for like my first 2 or 3 phones. What I would do is I would have 3 or 4 messages queued up, and if somebody sent me a text, I would send them back whatever the most coherent response would be. like like if my wife called up to say, texted me, pick up milk, I'd be like,
On
see
my
you
way.
soon, or yeah, so exactly, just to let them know that I got the message.
Right.
Because I could not text to save my life. Remember, in the old days, you had to go and pick the letter out, so it was like
Yeah.
2 steps, and if you made a mistake, it was a real pain to go back.
Right.
So just be like, you'll have to read through the typos. I'm sorry.
Right. Did you have a pager?
Daughter had a pager. It was at the very, very, very tail end because we actually got our pager right at the time cell phones were coming out, and it's like, why page somebody to call you when you can just call them?
I remember that too. I remember that one of the things that came out with cell phones is they said, "Oh, this is a cell phone and a pager." And I was like, who cares? What do you need a pager for? I thought that was just ridiculous. And then I do remember there was one that was almost like the first. So do you remember Palm Pilots, right?
I remember them. We never had one, but I do remember them.
I've got kind of a Palm Pilot kind of a thing in my somewhere here where you could punch numbers in and remember things, and it had a calculator and stuff. And this was about the time that I got my first phone, because I went there to get it, and they had a Palm Pilot that was also a cell phone. That was like the first, almost like the first smartphone there was.
Well, technically it is.
Yeah, it wasn't quite what we would consider a smartphone, but it was basically, a Palm Pilot where you could log numbers in and you could do calculations and stuff like that. And there were other things that had I forgot what it is, a calendar in it too. And then it had a phone too, and it was kind of like round. It was this round thing, and I never picked one up, but I never got one, but I did want one pretty darn badly. I never want one. All right, final thing, at least as far as I can think of, did you have any recording devices, mobile recording devices as you were growing up? Did you have a camcorder?
I was going to say video, no. Audio, yes. I had a cassette recorder when I was a kid. And yes, I was one of those kids. My friends and I would get together and do mock radio shows and whatnot with it. Yeah. And
did we.
Yeah, I think every kid does. And they always think they're so cool. Oh, yeah, it's a radio show. And until you get your first audio capacity. But yeah, that was like a lot of fun, and I think I probably still have 1 or 2 of those in my cassette collection somewhere.
Yeah, I think I do too. I think I got a box of tapes somewhere that just has me and my friends. One friend that I had, and I've mentioned him before, he was blind, and we used to stay up all night recording stuff onto tapes because he had a ton of tapes that he would get and then not have to return and whatever. You could get him over and over again. We had I think I told you he had tapes on book. He had like this 4-sided tape player. I've mentioned this before.
Yes.
But those tapes, I don't think he had to return. So we would just, and they could play in a regular tape player too. Um, and so we would just record over those like crazy. So they actually still had Braille on them. Actually, I think had a
Oh, no
couple that
kidding.
had, yeah.
No kidding.
So like the little thing, and then it would just be enough Braille. It wouldn't interfere with putting it in a tape deck or anything like that. Well, cool. So I didn't have anything to record people either. I wanted it bad though. I did want to make my own movies, and I thought this would be the best if I could make my own home movies.
There is one exception. I completely forgot about this, and I actually have this on videotape in my garage. I bought it off my friend. It had been his parents, and they were just getting rid of it. I had one of those old style 8mm film cameras, and you can still get film cartridges. And we would make our own silent movies. And we always came up with this great idea. What we would do is we will try to make a film and then match it up with an audio recording and actually have both. And that's much trickier than it sounds. So we were never able to actually bring sound to our silent movies. But I actually do have a video cassette with a bunch of old silent movies with some old really cool stop motion animation and whatnot. The first post-apocalyptic film I ever made actually was on a silent 8mm camera.
That's cool. That's really cool. Have you made more apocalyptic movies?
No. So it was it's my introduction and swan song.
Gotcha.
But, there you go.
Gotcha.
There.
Well, all right. Well, okay. Well, thank you everyone for listening to this episode or watching this episode, depending on whether you're on podcast or on YouTube, of Retro Serial. If you like what we're doing here, please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, write a review, write or what do you do? What do you do on podcasts? You leave a rating. You leave a rating and you write a review. All that good stuff. Visit us on Patreon if you want to help us out financially here at the channel. You're welcome to do that as well. It would be much appreciated. But if you're listening to this on podcast, I think I'm going to have this out at enough time to do our Monday night live stream where we'll talk about this. So if you want to chime in on your development and your history with technology, join us for our Monday night live stream. We do the Monday night live stream at 5:30 Pacific Standard Time. So adjust accordingly. So 5:30 Pacific Standard Time, and wherever you are, it's going to be whatever time that is there. So with that said, also subscribe to our channels. Thrash Pondo Ponds has got a channel, and I will leave all that information in the links in the description box. So thanks so much, everyone. And until we meet again, stay retro, everyone.